Hi, welcome to Let's Talk Careers. I'm your host, Lisa Bauman. Today, we're going to be talking with Zack Dodge, who's the supervisor for eSports operations here at Conestoga. Zack shared his career journey in student unions as manager in marketing and communications to eSports through his passion for communities and gaming. This was a fascinating conversation that I had and a field that I had no idea about. I hope you enjoy. Well, welcome, Zack. Thanks so much for coming in. I'm going to get you to start by introducing yourself. Maybe you can also say what you're currently doing and something you're really passionate about.
Sure. My name is Zack Dodge. I'm currently the supervisor of eSports operations with Conestoga College under the athletics and rec department. And it goes without saying, but video games have been a driving force in my life since my childhood, and they continue to be, and very transformative in my life. So I feel fortunate to where I've landed professionally.
Yeah, so let's get into some of those early days questions. And I like to ask about sort of that first paid job, maybe, as a student or even, as upon graduation, anything that you might have done in your first paid job.
Kind of previous to post-secondary or after post-secondary?
Yeah.
The first, I would say, major job that really stands out and growing up was working in a music store. Okay. I've always had an interest in media, entertainment, the worlds of Steven Spielberg and, big game franchises and things like that. And music, rock and roll and punk rock. So working in a music store coming out of high school and getting, more connected to the world of AV and production and being around musicians and, touring bands coming through, it was a huge influence on me. And allowed me to dive deeper into the world of media and just the entertainment properties that I was, just observing and, being a guest of, if you will. But I was getting more hands-on with it. So it was a big influence on me at the time.
Yeah, that's amazing. How did you get that job?
It was a co-op out of high school.
Okay,
yeah.
A co-op. Okay.
Yeah, so I started with a very simple, humble co-op at the end of my high school career. And sold a drum kit on my first night in my co-op, which I think made a great impression on my manager at the time. You don't just walk in and buy a drum kit. It takes a conversation. Yeah. And one thing led to another, and that turned into a pretty steady full-time job out of high school until kind of finding my way back to school. Okay.
And so you did that, and then you went back to school. What did you go back to school for?
Multimedia design and production at Conestoga College.
Okay, cool.
Followed with a post-grad in corporate comms and PR.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. What were some of the deciding factors in pursuing that pathway?
Spending all that time at Long McQuaid, my interest in video games really continued to develop. And there's nothing more exciting as a gamer than being caught in like the hype train of a new game coming out. Like I often say it now, I get more wrapped up in the excitement of a game or a product coming out than the actual like hands-on time with it later on when it finally hits on that big day. And I was so captivated at the time by the Halo franchise and kind of what was developing there in the early 2000s. And getting to a point where it's like, I love this stuff so much. I want to get more hands-on with it. It was really just kind of accelerating my interest in gaming. And I knew that, staying in the realm of retail and around, music and musical instruments, it wasn't going to bridge that gap to where I wanted to be with, let's say, the realm of gaming. And multimedia design and production seemed to be a good, entry point for. Sure. I needed to dabble in the realm. Am I going to excel in programming or art? Or I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to start somewhere.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So why gaming? Why gaming?
Yeah. You know what? Like gaming, if you were to ask me when, like a 10, 12, 13-year-old perspective on video games, it was that hobby. It was that pastime. It was staying up late at sleepovers. It was something to be social around. It was trips to Blockbuster. It was, it was great times. Jumbo Video, Blockbuster, it was a driving force in my childhood. And something about the communities, the experiences and the memories that started to form on those nights. I think about, that golden era, those early 2000 times on Xbox Live with my friends through that Halo franchise. Those were really the impression that time left on me, the community that was building around, the excitement I had and the interest in the technology and the systems and how it was all being brought together. It was very powerful. The characters and the narrative and my best friends, my family, my wife, like all of these great forces in my life were all coming together through the form of video games. And so they had kind of stepped out of this hobbyist space of like a time killer, something to, quickly jump into before you were going out for your night. And it really started to become, that was the destination at night, is we wanted to kind of hop online, be together, catch up on the week, play these games, improve as a team, whatever it was. And that really just kept snowballing through my 20s.
Okay. So it was the sense of community. It wasn't like the programming. It wasn't the art. It wasn't the storyline. It was that sense of community that really drew you into
all of it. But the community was like maybe the unexpected factor. Like all of a sudden that's where like social time and relationships were really, being chiseled out in my life was through gaming relationships.
So is that how you met your wife then?
No. We fortunately met, we met in high school, but Tammy and I, we found a common passion for games through growing up together, and how our relationship has formed. And, being cooperative gamers together and competitive gamers together has been a major force in our relationship. Yeah.
Cool. So you go to Fanshawe, you do these 2 programs, then what happens?
Yeah. So
did you get into gaming right away, or?
Yeah. So all the way through my college career, I formed a group called the Fanshawe Gaming League at the time, where when you look at collegiate esports now, this would have been the dawn of something like that, getting your TVs and consoles and bringing them into a student union hall and hosting tournaments. So through my academics, a lot of the projects I was doing, I was channeling towards, game related functions, club developments. I did an internship with a game developer in London as a video game tester. Led me to some networking with a great group called We Got Game. They do kind of like traveling pop-up events for various kind of corporate and private clients. And that brought me into like, the Microsoft gaming stores and launch events and things like that. So I was kind of building this like side hustle, Rolodex and kind of side portfolio of gaming related functions. But my career, brought me into student leadership and other functions as well. So I was kind of starting to be faced with a bit of a fork in the road professionally, but gaming was always there. It was always this driving force on the side, I guess you could say. Yeah.
So where did you end up? You ended up working for?
Yeah. So I think the big breakout towards the end of my college career was I was elected the student union president with the Fanshawe Student Union in 2012, 2013. And that completely kind of really shattered expectations for myself. I was kind of getting to that point where school was wrapping up. My interest in gaming was very alive and well, but it was tough to navigate the industry. It just wasn't quite there yet. There was a couple major developers in London, but outside of that, I was having still a hard time in knowing where to place it. Getting involved with student leadership, and now all of a sudden kind of breaking into this kind of advocacy, communication, kind of public facing role, it really started to shift how I was developing as a person, the network that I was tapping into, the skills that I all of a sudden was realizing that I was kind of stumbling into. And that led me into kind of a decade career working with student unions and getting into student affairs, all while, trying to side hustle kind of gaming related functions on the side. But coming out of school, I'd been really looped in with student unions for about a 10, 12 year run after school wrapped up.
So how did you go from then Fanshawe to here?
Yes.
How did that work out?
Yeah. So through my time at Fanshawe, I attended a few provincial conferences with groups like CSA at the time, and that connected me to some student leader counterparts at Conestoga. And so I hit it off with some of their student leaders at the time. They knew I was from the Tri-Cities. My term at the FSU was wrapping up, and I was going to be moving back to Cambridge. And job opportunities were starting to open up at Conestoga. And they're like, you should really put your name forward for this. A few friends at CSI at the time, you should really put your name forward. We think you'd be a great fit. One thing led to another, and, moved home from London the summer of 2013, and then started with Conestoga Students Inc. that same summer, where I spent, 9-10 years kind of developing in the Conestoga community.
Yeah. What did you do when you were like, what are some of your notable moments here at the college in that role?
I was hired as their first communications coordinator. At the time, it was really their first full-time communications staff. My work in communications really started to really bleed into what we were doing with special events. And so maybe 3-4 years into that initial communications portfolio, we kind of merged the realm of marketing and events together. And all of a sudden I found the work that I was doing with communication campaigns and messaging, we could be using our special events and activities and major events on campus as a vehicle to communicate what we're doing as a student union. And I, to think about my time at CSI, when I joined, Conestoga was still very Dune centric, but starting to break out to a few additional sites. And over the years that I spent developing with CSI, I think about website launches, restaurant launches, mobile apps, frosh kits, numerous t-shirt campaigns, launching new social media platforms, major concerts with, bringing in like major pop stars like Alessia Cara into the North Gym, or, booking major venues like Lot 33 and bringing in, kind of mainstay kind of hip hop and pop acts. Like it was really starting to tap back into that, that background of being a musician and getting into the realm of production. I was all of a sudden starting to see all of those forces combine. I love the tools and the soft skills and communication, but I was now getting to merge it with events and production. And it kind of kept that interest in gaming brewing on the side and allowed me to kind of continue to develop in that space too.
Yeah. So definitely you had like kind of a range, right? In terms of like communications, events, marketing, all of those pieces all kind of coming together.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember when Alessia Cara was here, I was like, that is the coolest thing.
Yeah.
I've been here for 16 years and
there you go.
I was like, wow, that's really cool that we brought in.
That was a big get. Yeah.
It was a big name, right?
Yeah. We were very proud of that one.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. So what happened from there? What happened from CSI to today?
Yeah. So I wrapped up my time with CSI as their senior marketing and events manager. And so those last few years when COVID, remote work, everyone's at home and really trying to kind of transform how we're serving students in a different format. And through that COVID break, I became aware of Condor's eSports. There was this new kind of eSports and gaming initiative developing through the athletics and recreation department. And when I first learned, and we were active collaborators with athletics and rec and other departments around the institution, and we shared space in the rec center. So we had some friends and colleagues there. And so when I quickly learned of what was going on with Condor's eSports, we were doing a lot of live streaming through CSI at the time. We were delivering workshops and events through live stream. And we threw out the idea like, hey, like, could we showcase one of your team captains and, kind of raid your esports stream when your match is getting started and try to bring the CSI audience and looking at, hey, we have competitive gaming teams. And so one thing kind of led to another over kind of I'd say a year or so, around 2022. And, I start to hear rumbles that an esports facility will be coming online at Waterloo. And it didn't take me long to really start to kind of piece this puzzle together that, okay, teams are forming under kind of varsity athletics. There's a facility opening in the Waterloo campus. They're going to need somebody to run this facility. And I was kind of building that puzzle on my own, very, nervously. I was very, very happy and stable in developing at CSI, but that passion for gaming has never gone anywhere. It's only ever grown and kind of captivated my interest. And so when those conversations around our now esports hub that we have at Waterloo was really starting to formalize, and I learned of a role being, an administrative role coming online to support that, I put my name forward. Yeah. I'm so grateful that I did. That's what kind of brought me to the Condors in 2022.
Okay. Yeah. This is a fascinating field. This is outside of my normal range of pieces, which I like, of the things that I sort of think about. And I like to try to think about, different creative pieces. So I need to understand more. Tell me more about this industry. What does it look like? And where do you think it might actually go?
Sure. So when I say I'm the supervisor of esports operations, we're really looking right now at the collegiate level of, competitive gaming. So looking at the esports, industry at large, we're talking, a multi-billion-dollar kind of private and public sector property, a kind of a global and international phenomenon that's really breaking out. Considered, fastest growing sport in the world, World Cup of esports coming to Saudi Arabia, this summer, $60 million prize pool coming up this summer with professional and national organizations getting involved. But when you kind of, shrink the scope down and we're starting to look at what's going on in Waterloo region, what's going on with collegiate esports, what we're doing with our hub and our teams and what it's really starting to do in the sector is starting to fill gaps, because right now you have your high performing, game enthusiasts at home that have the aspirations to be, I want to be a pro gamer. I want to be a pro streamer or content creator. The pipe dream, I want to play in the NHL. I want to be the next, Connor McDavid. Those dreams are alive and well. And then you have these pro franchises. We look at the Toronto Ultra or the Toronto Defiant. Those would be like your professional franchise level esport gaming teams. And then we've got this big gap in the middle. There's a gap in front of it in the K through 12 sector. And there's kind of this gap in the middle right now. How do you bridge a budding 18-year-old esports high performer to a professional organization, and help them peak in their kind of early to mid 20s? I really feel that's where collegiate and semi-professional level play is starting to come together. And I feel that the realm of collegiate esports and what institutions are starting to do around the country is create facilities, teams, infrastructure, academic pathways, collaborations with the private industry around us, and how we bring that budding, developing, passionate gamer, esports enthusiast, high performer in high school, and how do we bring them into an academic education, support their esports interests, and potentially channel them out to a career or professional play.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I need you to break this down just a little bit for me.
Yeah,
okay. Because it's like I said, this is outside of my realm of knowledge completely. I do see my kiddos playing video games.
Yes.
I do see them on these different streaming platforms where other people are playing games and they're narrating what's happening. Is that sort of where you're talking about this? And also maybe, because there might be other people like me trying to sort of understand what does
certainly.
this really look like, right? Because I think this is like you said, it's an emerging, crazy emerging field. So break it down just a little bit more for me. So what would they be playing? What would they be doing? What would be,
Yeah. So we have to remember video games is a $1 trillion industry where esports and the competition of gaming is really a small subsect of the larger, let's say, passion and pastime of video games at large. But what we're doing with esports, so you're looking at some of the most accessible and competitive video game titles. Usually an esport title or a video game that surfaces needs to be accessible by a wide audience, which makes a lot of these titles completely free to play. You're not buying a traditional, let's say $80 retail video game title. You're downloading a game for free that's accessible, whether it's on a console or a PC.
What would be an example of a game?
Something like a Counter-Strike or Valorant or League of Legends, Rocket League, Fortnite, all of Call of Duty, all very popular, major esport titles. And a lot of those titles, what they share in common, they're accessible on numerous devices or PCs with kind of a wide range of capabilities so that you can play in different global markets with different scopes of equipment. But because they're free and accessible to jump into, the barrier to entry is very minimal. And the game developers that are making those esport titles, they're intentionally trying to build communities, rule sets, mechanics in the game where you can measure competition, measure skill, and be competitive. There's a difference between playing some recreational Mario Kart and a high-performing esports title that's really giving the players and the audience the tools to measure skill and competition.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay,
Yes.
So now you have these people going in, playing these games.
Yes.
They kind of is this what you're talking about? They kind of get naturally good at it. And you're like, hey, why don't when you said build academics around it, teach them how to do it better? Is that kind of what you're thinking about? But also giving them the platform to be be a competitive player. Is that kind of what?
It's a bit of both. On one hand, we're finding, an esports athlete that's, skilled in game and they have the aspirations to be a higher performer in that game title. And we can bring them in like a traditional varsity athlete from a traditional sport with intentional facilities and coaching and student supports and help them develop in game. But we're also just looking for an environment like Conestoga College to take a young individual that otherwise is maybe having a hard time navigating what do I do with this interest in gaming and what do I do with my next step coming out of high school, and they can bring their passion for esports and their skill within esports, bring that to an academic space like Conestoga College, study in an adjacent field. You don't need to be studying esports and technology. You could get into the culinary arts or, whatever program of your liking, but esports can be this great, sticking point through your college career to build community and improve as an individual, get involved in a team environment, network, et cetera, and find an exciting place to use those skills, right?
Yeah. And then have opportunities to compete with different, similar areas. That's what you mean by collegiate, right?
Yeah, because collegiate esports, We're very excited at Conestoga to be preparing to open our arena. We have an esports arena, a 10,000 square foot purpose-built esports arena. It's great, pinch me, opening in 2025. And if you're, an esports athlete right now and playing at that collegiate level, playing in a facility like that against some top tier North American teams from whether it's colleges or universities from around North America, that may be the highest level of competition that you peak at, because you might not go on to professional play, much like aspirations to be a professional athlete. They're few and far between. So competing at a high level at collegiate within really fantastic facilities and jersey on, that full support like that we really look to build that experience and make that be that moment, that memory, that moment.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I need you to describe for me, what does the arena look like?
Oh gosh.
Because I'm thinking a hockey arena, but that's not quite right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me what that looks like.
I think the trick with this arena when going through the planning process was like the space needed to be flexible. It needed to be modular and serve kind of different esport and campus and, kind of facility based functions. But this is a 10,000 square foot box that we've been able to partition off. One side being a lecture hall, the other side being a very intentional purpose-built stage and gaming floor. When you're having a major event, you can collapse that partition, bring in extra seating, tap into the lecture seating on one side of the space and have like a spectator-driven event. But during the day, that partition can be closed. You can have roughly 50 PCs, gaming consoles, racing simulation equipment, VR headsets, all being used in like intentional kind of modular spaces to play recreationally or competitively. The whole space is really highlighted by a raised competition stage where you could do 5 versus 5, team-based competition. So you could have a visiting institution come in and compete against the Condors from a local school.
Crazy.
You could bring in professional esports organizations and host a legitimate tournament within the space. Above that stage, a 32-foot direct view LED that's just going to be the most, fabulous visual display that you'll feast your eyes on. I guarantee anywhere in this region, it's going to be a beautiful, beautiful kind of display above the stage. And then other great fun, integrated broadcast, a full analyst suite, a team operations room. It's a really comprehensive space.
So how many people are on this team of yours? Because I'm like, that sounds like an army of people needed to make that all come together.
Now, like in regards to like the personnel to make the arena possible, or like the esports teams that are competing?
Well, you said you're the supervisor of a team, right?
Yeah.
So who's on your team? What is it like? What are?
Yeah. So our staff right now has we've really had the opportunity to grow over the last couple of years. We now have professional full-time staff for facility operations, media coordination, coaches for each of our esport titles. Because when we say we have an esports team, what we really are saying is we have various small teams represented within different video game titles. So we have 5 different game titles with 6 teams, each with different athletes on them. In the same way that you wouldn't put your basketball team on the soccer field, building intentional teams for intentional games, but media staff, facility staff, coaches, event staff, various administrators, kind of supporting varsity coordination staff. You could look at a lot of the traditional norms that you would need to build a traditional sport operation, and we've very much applied that to the world of esports.
So how many people can you count it out in your head there quick?
Geez. If you start to layer in work study students and full-time staff, we'd be 50 plus in personnel. Yeah. And then another roughly 40 in varsity athletes, and then additional in our developing team. So a total, like the core group of staff, personnel, and various competitors were probably closer to the 120, 150 range.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's obviously jobs and careers in this field.
Certainly. Yeah.
So tell me more about that. What is the industry needing in terms of people interested in getting into the field? What do you need to get into? What do you need to do to get into this field?
Yeah, it certainly.
What are you looking for when you're hiring all those people?
I think that's been very exciting when talking to, whether it's prospective students, our current student portfolio, families, looking at the world of esports. You need to start to understand as a young professional, what area of this business do I want to engage with? Do I want to be involved with tournament operations and event hosting? Do I want to be involved in the multimedia production and live stream? Do I want to get into the business of operating an esports organization and managing a team? Do I want to get into the development of players, talent scouting and coaching? Like all of those areas are existing. So when we look at what the academic opportunities at Conestoga, they're very centric right now to marketing, events, and kind of the business development around esports. But those would be three major verticals to what can be a very wide spectrum of opportunities. I think a big wave that we're going to see in kind of the job sector over the next, let's say 5 to 7 years is other collegiate operations coming online.
Right.
I see what we're doing at Conestoga. We see what our friends are doing at St. Clair and Windsor.
Yep.
These spaces and operations are really starting to become widespread, popular, and developing nationwide.
Yep.
I could see this first major cohort of eSport graduates, whether it's from Conestoga or like-minded programs, really being mobilized into the collegiate sector and growing up that next wave, that gap. Filling in that gap. Because outside of that, looking at private sector esports and what's going on in the Toronto market, we look at a major group like Overactive Media, where they have, pro franchises. They're converting spaces like the former Maple Leaf Gardens, now the Mattamy Athletic Center. They're converting that space a few times a year to host major stadium seat-based esport tournaments. So those jobs and those skills are there. It's not like there's a widespread group of companies that large that are, that's not happening in every major region. Yeah. That's why I really think collegiate's going to be this great in-between step while these pro orgs are really starting to integrate with the Canadian market over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. So is there any other universities? We've got 3 major universities in the area. Are they doing this?
To degrees. University of Waterloo, we've got great friends and colleagues at UW. We've collaborated on some major events. They have intentional esports staff and high performing teams. They're certainly starting to make strides within the space. We engage in a group called eSport Canada and then eSport Canada Post-Secondary. And it's really a collection of individuals, whether at the club, affiliate, or varsity level, counterparts like myself nationwide that are at kind of varying degrees of this. Are they a part-time student staff that's developing their program? Is it full-time staff with coaches, et cetera? There'd be a few dozen coast to coast. I think Conestoga is a leader in the field and kind of what we've invested into this in personnel, facilities, infrastructure. But there's certainly a few. There's certainly a few that are within that camp, and then many developing that need a few years and some support. Yeah,
along the way. Yeah. So it sounds like if this is something you're interested in, this could be an amazing career opportunity for people kind of moving into the field.
I think so. I think looking at esports, collegiate esports, and the sector at large, if you're an interested gamer, a very passionate gamer, and you're not quite sure what to do with that interest, you can start to look at it more broadly than if I'm not going to be a pro gamer or make a video game, there's not much that I can do. Because 10, 12 years ago, that was my narrow mind. I knew I was a very passionate gamer and I had the drive to be in the industry, but the pathways weren't quite there. Esports really hadn't become a household topic, and the concept of tournaments with major prize pools and teams and organizations managing those teams, it wasn't there to see the job opportunities. Now it truly is. You may need to relocate to pursue a job with the right organization, but you can look at your interest in gaming and esports more broadly now.
Yeah,
and
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
I love that. That is so crazy. Thinking about the field now, or thinking about how it's kind of gone from being in the basement and being these informal communities, how do you see the transition of this industry kind of moving into more of that kind of a corporate space?
Yeah, I think it's keeping the right leaders in the conversation as these worlds start to collide. Gamers, they're looking for authenticity when they're being pitched to or when a program is being introduced. And there needs to be a bit of compromise on either end. I think, esports or collegiate esports will only stay at a certain level if there aren't some norms that will be required to help it find that legitimacy, or some standardizations, if you will. I think some of that is required for the health of the players, leagues, tournament operations, et cetera. But it needs to be done authentically. And so I think, as the corporate worlds or institutional leaders continues to engage with gaming and esports, making sure you have the right voices around the table, I think will be very valuable, or you'll miss the audience, because that's the nature of gaming. If a game publisher is, riddled with wrongdoings towards their gaming community. Like you'll be on fire in social media in a heartbeat, and the bandwagon jumping to the next title, and the boycotting of a title, the community will move along, and you could almost kind of use that as an example for the sector at large. So the standardizations and kind of getting that circle in a square compromise along the way, it needs to be done with that gamer at heart, so that it's done with the right attitude, the right flair. And so that we don't lose kind of some of the magic of what video games were in the first place. I try to remind myself in all of this, in my corporate work in the world of esports, like we're still talking about video games here. Like we need to continue to boil that down and remember the joy and the entertainment and the community that is curated within those games. And it can't get so stiff that it departs from its intended purpose. Yeah.
I like the authenticity part.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that also adds a layer for the diversity as well, right? And especially having that voice being echoed up the chain, so to speak, as it goes into a kind of a corporate space.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to go to you because so it sounds like, and maybe you're making an assumption here, you've probably put in a lot of hours to get to where you are, right? Like it just didn't happen magically overnight. You put in a lot of time and effort, and you're building, right?
Yes.
How do you find a bit of balance in between? Because that's another big piece, right?
Yeah, I'm a father of two boys, happily married, and a father to Henry and Joseph, and they are the best and most powerful distraction you can ever ask for. Joseph just turned 3, shares a birthday with my wife on May 25th, and Henry turned 6 in September. So they're beautiful. They're beautiful. They're the best. And there's nothing better than having a very busy, active, engaged workday. And you get home, you pick them up, you start dinner, and you flow into that night. And there's nothing more than I love than to turn off whatever I've been doing and just lock into that. I love video games, and I love my children ever more than that. And so I'm grateful that esports and the demand of that career choice found me at the same time that fatherhood really kicked off, because they pull me away from work in the best ways.
So how do you do that? Because I think that's what, maybe people like me, a little bit older, we have trouble turning it off.
Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you just turn it off?
I don't want to say I have a hard time with it, but I'm trying to kind of redefine my relationship with my interest, because, I traditionally, when I've had a long day at work and I've been a little, burnt out with whatever's going on with work and the pressures of the week and all the other things that are, I would jump into a video game at night to relax. And sometimes now that works, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I need to go turn on the fire in the backyard and sit down and, touch grass, literally work on the yard and do something different. And I'm finding, once again, like that cross section with fatherhood and my domestic life really developing, like that's happened at the right time, because it pulls me away from technology. My connection to my work and my connection to esports and gaming, it's all very technology founded. I'm always reachable through Teams or Discord or social media or whatever's going on. So if I'm going to be an active dad, we are hitting the backyard and we're playing catch, or we're going to the park, or riding bikes, or throwing the frisbee. Like it takes me away from, and so I think it's just be an active father. If I'm being an active father, then it's taking me, it's removing me from the equation of getting some work done at times. Yeah. But I still love to play some games to relax. Like that's all I was doing last night.
What's your favorite? I have to ask now. What's your favorite game?
Halo. I'd be lying to myself if it wasn't the Halo series. Bungie, their developer, I've been playing their games since 2001. They followed up a very lucrative franchise with Destiny. That was kind of their major follow-up series. So between Halo and Destiny, I've been playing those games consecutively since 2001.
Wow.
Like weekly, daily to weekly for, 20 years, 20 plus years.
Yeah, that's interesting. I want to shift gears again just a little bit and ask about sort of AI and what the impact is. And I'm asking lots of people in all kinds of different fields because I find it quite fascinating.
Sure.
What do you think that the impact AI will be on your field in particular?
Yeah, it's certainly a tricky topic to explore right now, because I'm starting to dabble a little bit even within my own work and trying to find little efficiencies and where could I be taking a task that could be sped up by a quick, AI prompt. And I think what I've been most curious with, so stripping games out from esports for a moment, you don't have a healthy esports industry without a healthy video game industry.
Yeah.
There has been mass layoffs in the sector, in the video game sector since 2022. Games are taking longer to make. They're more expensive to make. Teams are ballooning up to develop these games, and then layoffs come after the games are launched. What I'm getting at is, game developers are starting to leverage AI and find efficiencies in development. Okay. And so if developers can find more efficient ways to still keep human talent and true artistic and technical integrity that comes from human ingenuity, if that can be married with AI efficiencies in game development, I gather games could be made more efficiently. Budgets could be, controlled more responsibly, which could lead to a healthier, more sustainable industry at large that's making these products that turn into an esport title that turns into all these kind of trickle down effects. So I'm very curious where major property, like, Microsoft owns literally dozens and dozens and dozens of game studios, and how it influences the world of esports and how they're connected to AI. Very curious to see what a leader like Microsoft is going to do with AI, how it trickles into their esport title developments and game developments, and how that in turn builds a healthier sector. Because a lot of esports right now, it can be volatile at times. A lot of mergers and consolidation around companies, and a lot of it's because budgeting and money and trying to kind of make this sustainable and financially successful. But it stems from very expensive, complicated games. And so I think AI will in time improve that workflow and that system.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about diversity in the field itself?
Yeah.
What does that look like? What are some of the pressure points that need to be looked at? What does it look like now?
Yeah, I think some of the best examples, if we look at Riot Games, they publish two of the largest esport titles in the world, both League of Legends and Valorant. They've done such a good job in creating a platform and what they call their Game Changers program to bring forward diverse teams and to show the biggest game titles and competitions in the world. There needs to be equal, conversation, representation, and exposure to these groups. I know our internal interest in a game title like Valorant and what's happening in that game changer community, it's really driven us at Conestoga to be, very early to market with an all women's Valorant team.
Nice,
It's been very important to us to have, whether it's mixed gender teams or female or female identifying teams. We, been very, intentional through our hiring practices to bring in, developing, female student talent in the esports sector. We've had some phenomenal, female leads, I think, even administratively, guiding esports operations from the top down, even over the last few years. I think about strong female leaders in our community, like Barb Kelly or Kristen Bolliger, my former manager. These were phenomenal, diverse, esport leads here at Conestoga. That are stemming from that mindset. But no, it's something that we're mindful of, whether it's with intentional programming, how we're building teams, how we're engaging our high school communities. We did some recent programs like a Go Code Girl and Girls in Gaming, trying to engage our youth in the community into something like the esports facilities that we have. But yeah, certainly trying to not have esports operations be a boys' club,
Yeah. Definitely. Where do you think the field is? I think I asked you this question. Where do you think the field is going to go? Where do you think it's going to go?
I think looking 10 years out, it's going to be seeing a more sustainable pipeline between childhood interest in gaming, development through their K through 12 years, what an academic pathway looks like, and then what an industry connection looks like. So if you're an interested gamer at 10 years old, I would really hope in 10 years time, the education sector combined with what's going on with kind of private and public sector competitive esports, there's been some unison created there, whether it's for talent development, academic pathways, career pathing. I think trend wise, when looking at the sector, we're seeing the rise of mobile gaming, and are we going to be continuing to compete on traditional PCs with mouse and keyboard and traditional controllers through a game console? I think it's going to take some time for a VR headset or a mobile device to completely trump what's going on with the technology access in esports. But I think what's more exciting is really that pathway and pipeline. I think just nationally, if we can start to find constructive ways to channel that passion of gaming from a young person straight through to a professional career, I think that would be something we could all share some pride in 10 years' time. Yeah,
that's cool. That's cool. What is your future goal?
My future goal is really open this arena. This esports arena is a major, that's Kilimanjaro right now. That's the top of the mountain. Let's get through and get this arena out there, getting our collegiate communities and larger esport communities engaging with this space. I would love to see Waterloo region at large really be identified as a national leader in esports, whether that's for event hosting, for collegiate talent development, for professional org alignments. I really see what we're doing here at Conestoga as the anchor to that esports movement. And I would love if my contributed efforts were involved with that and seeing, a great light shone on what we're doing here, because I think we're off to a great start.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What advice would you give to people thinking about this field?
Oh, geez. Brush up on your Excel sheet skills.
We didn't talk about budgeting, did we?
Budgeting being one thing, but the other is so funny to think. But if I would have gone back in time and known how many functions of esports, whether you're organizing rosters and sharing information, tournament ladders, so many logistical functions are built in Google Sheets and Microsoft Excel. And that's literally from some of the most established leagues. We're working off Google Sheets, so much of it. So I wish I was more of a formula whiz. Other advice, I would say, really just be your authentic self. Don't be afraid if you have soft skills versus hard skills. I know I was measuring my relevance and what I thought would have been a career in the games industry. So it's like, well, I'm not a skilled programmer. I'm not this like hotshot artist. I'm not going to fit in the games industry. And I had no idea what my soft skills and how those were developing and how that could lead me into a very like-minded career within the same field. So be your authentic self, spend the time to understand what your skills are so that you can really harness those powers. Some Excel workshops along the way. I'd be a more efficient version of myself with them.
If AI could fix anything, it would be those Excel sheets.
Yes, please.
And so what gives you hope for the future?
Oh, geez. I think it's moments like this. I think about where my college, in my college years, it was so even at that time, it was impossible to think that an academic institution like Conestoga College in 12 years time would be investing into esports the way that we are. Like, that is magical. Like, it's crazy to think, what the vision that we all share here. That gives me hope because it's not this counterculture, stigmatized, basement hobby of gamers trying to kind of pledge the relevance to the community at large. It's taking a leader like Conestoga and trusted spaces like public colleges and universities. It's like, no, we see the community. We get it. We see the relevance and the importance that this is bringing. And so I think, esports developing in collegiate is the hope that the right people are seeing this and giving it the shot that it deserves. Yeah. Because otherwise it's generations of gamers that don't quite know what to do with that interest. And this is really starting to kind of carve that out. Yeah. And that gives me great hope.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. I personally had no idea. And I'm sure there's others out there like me who had no idea. But this is super fascinating.
Certainly.
Super fascinating. Any final thoughts?
No, thank you for the opportunity. If there's one thing I love more than working on what I get to do, it's talking about it. Being involved in a gaming podcast is one of those bucket list items. So this is a maybe first episode.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Wow, what a great conversation. Thank you for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Careers. If you liked this episode and want to hear more, follow us on Spotify and subscribe on YouTube. See you in the next one.